Morning.
Hey Kate, thank you for coming on the podcast. I just want to kick off first of all by talking about bovine TB. Could you explain a little bit about what it is?
So bovine TB is a disease that animals can get. And the cause and the spread can be from different things. So everybody knows about badgers and cows and deers. It's impossible to safeguard your animals from it. You can't, areas where TB is quite bad with badgers, for example, you cannot secure your farm against a badger because badgers can climb up all sorts of fences and tunnel under things and piddle all over the grass. So it is pretty much impossible to stop it. We test for it in cattle sort of routinely, and it depends where you are in the country as to when you test for it. Some people are on every sort of 60 days, some are every 6 months, some are a year. Where we are every 4 years. Fortunately, it's been like that for quite a long time. Well, all my life, we've been in a 4 year area. So every 4 years, all the animals for breeding get tested for bovine TB.
And is this the same as human TB or is it different?
To be honest, I don't 100% know.
Yeah.
I think humans can catch TB from a bovine animal, but it is extremely, like ridiculously hard to do. And I only know that through my own experience with my background as I worked in the hospital. When we had our little issue that we're going to come on to, I had to go and be screened. And that information came from the consultant who did my testing, that to catch bovine TB from an animal is extremely difficult. We would have to be in an enclosed space with that animal with poor ventilation for 2 weeks constantly. And the animal would have to be shedding those spores at the time of that 2 week period. If there's a lesion in the meat and you eat that meat, you still won't catch bovine TB if the meat has been cooked, because the cooking process kills the TB lesion. Again, this was what information I was given during my consultations. So it's, I believe that it's true. You don't see many people catching bovine TB these days, fortunately. And we don't vaccinate anymore for TB in our children. I'm sure we all had that nice little injection at school that we all hated. Everybody then ran around and punched you in the arm, didn't they, when you had your TB injection? But yeah, I don't think we don't do that anymore in this country. So I think the risk is quite low.
And as I understand it, DEFRA are the people the government agency that are responsible for carrying out the testing. Is that correct?
They are, yeah. Individual vets, your own veterinary practice can come and do your testing, your routine testing. But it is through the government. The government tell you when you need to do it, and it is compulsory. You have to do that.
And that's based on, I guess, how prevalent the disease is. Like you said, some areas they have to be tested more frequently. Is that one of the criteria?
Yeah. So in areas where animals can show that they have TB, so a lot of sort of down south, they have an awful lot of issues down there, and they are in a sort of a more frequent testing area than us here, although that border is creeping closer and closer.
So you were talking about your experiences. I know is it your family that had I don't know what the word is, cattle farm, or can you explain a little bit about it?
Yeah, so I grew up on my mum and dad's farm. Always was involved with the cows, loved being around them, but didn't go into a career in farming myself until later on in life. So but I always helped out. So we used to have our TB testing every 4 years. And to be honest, I think we didn't really understand the test. We didn't understand the implications if you had a positive reactor. It just was a little bit of a nuisance on the farm because it interrupted the daily workings. You had to put every animal through the handling system on day one, and then you had to do it again on day 3. So it took an awful lot of time out of your usual routine of farming. So we only just really saw it as a pain in the backside. Never realised what effects it can have if you have a positive reactor, until 2010 came along and shocked us into reality, I suppose.
So was that the first time you'd ever experienced a positive result?
Yeah. So I've, like I say, all my childhood, every 4 years we would TB test, and we never had an issue. And in 2010, we were, I suppose, quite blasé about having the test done again. Everything was sort of going smoothly. We did have a cow who had given birth that morning, and it's only subsequently we found out that things can affect the test. It's not 100%, and hormone changes can be one of those things that affect it. Unfortunately, that cow, so if I explain the test to start with, that might make it a little bit clearer. So you would have a vet or a technician would come on day one. Every animal has a certain part of their neck skin measured. So it's a pair of calipers that just get squeezed by that technician, and they measure the thickness of the animal's skin. We then inject a very small amount of TB into the skin, and then the technician comes back 3 days later, measures the thickness of that skin again to see if it has increased in thickness. If there's an increase in thickness, then that animal is deemed as potentially TB positive, and then it is sent to slaughter. So it's not the most accurate test in the world, especially in today's society. Those calipers don't even emit the same amount of pressure. There's no gauge. It just depends on who is squeezing the calipers. And that's been the same test for over 100 years now. We've got cars that nearly drive themselves, haven't we? The technology is amazing. But yet we just still use this very old method of testing. So the cow in particular, she'd given birth that morning, so we left her right till the end, just so that she had longer time with her calf, less stressful for her to be separated from it, although it was only a short period of time. So she went through the handling system, she had her neck skin measured, she had the injection, and then she returned back to her calf. 3 days later, all our animals went back through that handling system, and every single one passed. But then the final cow to go in was the one that gave birth. So she went in, and her thickness of skin had increased. So she was deemed as TB positive, potentially. She was issued with a slaughter notice a day and a time that they were coming to take her and her calf. And that was as much as we could do about it. Like I say, we'd never had this situation, so we were absolutely devastated. And also panicking because we didn't know what it meant for the whole herd. You think, gosh, we've potentially got this animal that's positive to TB. We could have it rumbling right the way through the herd, not know how they've got it. It could potentially be wildlife that has spread it, which, how do you deal with that? Or it could have been an animal that we'd bought in, or who knows. But also my dad was selling breeding animals. So he'd sold different animals to different farms as well. And then you're thinking, gosh, have we spread it to them? So it was really upsetting, really stressful. It just threw us into this sort of shocked, panicked stage, I suppose. And the unknown. We didn't know what it meant for the herd. A few days later, we were told that DEFRA officials were coming to the farm. The farm was closed down, so no animal could move on or off the holding. And literally, when I say the men in white coats turned up, they did. So the chap that came, the forensic white suits that they put on at crime scenes, it was like one of those. He donned this white suit and these white wellies, and he'd got a clipboard. And our experience, feeling really upset and worried and not knowing, what we were about to face, he didn't seem very, I want to say sympathetic, and that's maybe the wrong word. but he certainly didn't come across in a nice manner. He was very hierarchical, just made us feel like we were like this massive diseased herd that had done something wrong, not reassured or supported. So of course that makes you even more worried, doesn't it? You're facing a situation you've no idea about, but you want somebody to come and help you through it, not be the opposite. So he explained what was going to happen, that the farm was shut down and that all the animals would have to have a blood test, which was a more in-depth test. So the arrangements were made for the blood test to be carried out. I can't remember how many days it was, to be honest, because that was all a bit of a panicked blur. But this particular morning, we were waiting for the technicians to arrive. 2 of them arrived to blood sample all the animals. Now, my little boy that we are talking about today, Boxy, his official title is Hallmark Boxster, but you'll hear me call him Boxy. It's just that was my nickname for him, or even Lulu, which don't go there. Lulu for a big bull is a bit of a wussy name, but So Boxster, I did have a special sort of connection with him. We had been showing him at agricultural shows the year before. He was a gentle giant, absolutely adored him. He was unbeaten in the show ring. So we were really excited for what was going to happen with him the year after, going out as a mature bull, because he was only about 18 months at that time. So we were quite excited and looking forward to the future with him. But if I can describe him, like he was like a great big bodybuilder who's covered in tattoos, who faints if he has his flu vaccine. So for his size, he was an absolute wuss. I suppose Lulu actually did suit him because he was a big wuss. He hated needles. He was terrified. So what we decided, there was him and a couple of special animals. Not saying that all of them weren't special, but we'd got like a really old cow who my dad thought the world of. And so those animals were we decided to do them first, get the special ones sorted, the ones that needed a little bit of TLC, and then move on to the rest of the herd. So, and Boxster was actually quite big. He didn't fit in the handling system very well, but he was quiet. He was halter trained and quiet. So the way that this second test was done is they take a blood sample. Now, I'm sure a lot of your viewers have had a blood sample in the past, but there's a vacuum in that vial. So when the needle goes into the vein, the blood automatically fills the vial, and then when it's full, the flow stops and you've got your sample. So it's the same with the blood testing of the cattle. But where they get the blood from is there's a really big juicy vein under the animal's tail. So the cow's tail has to be lifted up and the needle inserted under the tail. Well, if you imagine a ton bull who is scared of needles, he's not going to let you do that happily. And also, animals really pick up on how we're feeling. And I think because we were upset, we were nervous, we were scared, we were definitely on edge. He picked up on that as well. And so I think that made him worse. So every time the technician went to take a blood sample, he was like throwing himself around. And the technician in question was actually scared of him as well. So the blood sample was being taken at arm's length. So she kept jabbing, trying to follow his little movements with his tail. He was swishing his tail and wiggling his bum around. She kept losing the vacuum in the vial. So the vial would... Sorry, that's just my strange clock. I forgot to silence it. He was moving about, and she would either lose the vacuum in the vial or the vial would fall on the floor. So she would jab him again. And as this continued, he got more and more worked up. My dad was trying to restrain him, and things were getting quite scary, really. She was getting more scared. The bull was getting more wound up, and my dad was getting more in danger. And in the end, what happened, she just flicked the tops off two bungs, off two samples, partial samples, mixed them together, put the bung on and said, there, we've got the sample, put him away. Now, we did not think about that sample. We didn't care about the sample, to be honest. I couldn't care less. I was just relieved that everybody was safe and that Boxy was able to go back to his pen and sort of chill out for the rest of the day and get over it. So we moved on and other animals were sampled, some easier than others, but, you know, we were all a bit stressed. And so the day didn't exactly run, you know, stress-free, should I say. But everything happened sort of as it should. A couple of days later, we got the results back and Boxer had tested positive for TB. And he was, I need to get the figure right, but I think it was 0.00001 over the benchmark positive. So it was minute, real tiny amount positive to the TB test. So he was issued with a slaughter notice, a time and a day that they were coming to collect him. Well, we were devastated. You know, I loved this bull and my dad had got real big high hopes for him from a breeding point of view. And my mum was just devastated as well. It was, you know, potentially a loss of another animal. So we asked them to retest him. Because the test hadn't been carried out properly, we asked for a retest just to make sure. We said if he had TB, we totally understood that, you know, he would have to go, but can we just make sure because the test hadn't been done properly? I believe the technicians in question were asked what happened. They said that he didn't play up and nothing happened and they didn't mix the samples. So it kind of turned into their word against ours. We offered to pay for the retest. We offered £1,000. That was turned down because they didn't want to set a precedent for farmers in future that if you disagreed with the test, you could just get a new one. Our argument was nobody would pay £1,000 for a simple blood test if their animal wasn't worth it. But we were declined that. So we ended up getting a court injunction to stop them taking him. That meant that Boxer was put into isolation while the injunction sort of was in force and we were looking at legal ways to have him retested. So his isolation paddock was determined by DEFRA. So he had to be a certain distance away from other animals. And actually the place that he was, he couldn't see another animal. He had no shelter. He certainly wasn't with another animal. And we weren't allowed to go in with him. Now we're talking the equivalent of like a young teenage boy. You know, he should have been going out and flirting with the girls and messing about with the boys and having a good time and preparing himself for later life. So to not be in contact with any other animal was extremely difficult for him. We didn't realise how long that process was going to take. And I think if we had done, I'd have given in and let him go. But when you start fighting something, the more you get into the sort of situation you're in, you just go day by day, minute by minute, you fight each challenge as it comes. You don't really think long term. And so time ticked on. And actually, he was in isolation for a total of 18 months. Now, this was the winter of 2010. So we've never had a winter like it. The snow was horrendous. And don't forget, he had no shelter. We couldn't get anybody to help us. Nobody was interested in his welfare, really, or that's how it felt. We wanted to bring him in, even isolate him, but bring him into the whole shed where the rest of the animals are. We couldn't do that. So we ended up making our own shelter and lowering it in for him just to give him some kind of comfort over the winter. He coped extremely well, but it was really hard to see him in that situation. But like I say, you don't really think about the long term, you know, how long this is going to take or go on for. We were having all sorts of meetings. Those meetings we felt had a lot of threatening nature to them. At one point, my dad was called a tin pot farmer and told that he couldn't possibly win or keep fighting them because he would run out of money, which only angered my dad even more, made him more determined. But yeah, we don't like injustice. And it just felt like nobody would, the simple thing would have been to issue a retest, just test him again. If he was positive, he'd have gone. But it all stemmed from the technicians saying that nothing happened and us saying it did. This whole cost to the public, government money, and our stress and the welfare of the animal was all unnecessary. There was a lot of whiskey involved in the decision making at our end. So each time something would happen and we'd be like, can't do anything about that. I think we've lost now. I think we're going to have to let him go. Usually I would start crying. My dad would get the whiskey bottle out. We'd have a couple of whiskies and somehow we got our fight back each time. So it really is down to, I don't know whether I'm allowed to say the product. But yeah, it really was all down to whiskey, really, that we ended up carrying on the fight.
What was the response of the farming community?
They were brilliant. We had them all sort of rallying us on. We organised a meeting at Selby Livestock Market. We invited DEFRA officials, and they did come, and a lot of farmers came. I think it was described in one of the papers as an ambush, but it wasn't. It was to educate other farmers into, TB testing, and basically to watch what's happening, to take note of the test. If something doesn't feel right at the time, say it. I think that's our sort of good old British nature, isn't it? You sort of think, oh, well, that doctor knows best, or, whoever it is that's talking to you, who's in a particular position of either authority or knowledge, we take it that they're always right, and don't really challenge things if we think that it's wrong. And that's one massive lesson that I've learned now is, I'm my animal's advocate. So if I don't feel something is right, then I speak up at the time, and the same, just I take my mum and dad to the doctors and things like that. And if I'm not sure on something, I don't sit back anymore. I just politely ask for things in a different way. So, I think we do sort of sit back and let things happen. And so we wanted the farmers to understand the test, to understand the implications of that test not being carried out right. And I suppose to try and help us in the fact that all we wanted was this retest, and for DEFRA to explain to them why it wasn't possible. So the farmers were great. They even said if it came to it and they were coming to collect him for slaughter, they would all turn up on their tractors and barricade the road. Now, whether that would have happened or not, I don't know, but it'd have certainly sort of looked quite good.
Is the consensus amongst farmers that the tests are a bit archaic, that they need to modernise how they conduct the testing?
I can't speak for all farmers, but I know a lot of farmers aren't happy with the test. They're not happy with the test. They're not happy with the way that they're treated about the test, and they're not happy with sort of just the whole thing in general. There's an awful lot of sort of unhappiness around TB testing, whether it be the areas, how often you're being tested, but certainly the test accuracy has got to come into it. It's like I say, in today's society, surely there is something that is better if indeed we need to do it like we're doing it, and as often. But we continued with the sort of fight, and we ended up in London on a 3-day trial in the High Courts of Justice. everybody thought we were crackers, really, because it cost us £120,000 at this point to get to court, and we only had a 20% chance of success. So the odds were stacked against us. But the odds were stacked against us because it was the government that we were fighting. You know, don't forget, we were just a tin pot farmer. But we went to court that first morning, not knowing what we were going to sort of be facing. We met our barrister, who, when he first walked in, he was very young, but he was brilliant. You know, when you sort of think, how old are you? Have you qualified? And it was a bit daunting that we only met our barrister that morning and just before we walked into court. You know, you kind of think you're going to have all these big meetings with them, and, you know, you have to trust that actually they've done their job right and they've read everything and they've understood it. And although I did take a lot of Post-it notes with me, and I sat directly behind him throughout the whole procedure. And every time I thought of something, I would write it down on the Post-it note, poke him in the back with my pen, and pass him the Post-it note. So by the end of the 3 days, he'd got a pile of these Post-it notes, which was quite funny. But on our side of the courtroom, it was just our barrister, our solicitor, my mum, my dad, and me. On the other side of the courtroom, it was absolutely full from top to bottom. You know, how many people were there were unbelievable from DEFRA's point of view, all working away, all scribbling away throughout the whole 3 days. It was witness cross-examination. I mean, I've never been to court before. You know, it was, the courtroom itself looked like something that you'd see on the telly. And I know that sounds daft because it's real, but we kept thinking, for our little case about our little bull, we're here in London in a courtroom that's got all this wood paneling around it, you know, that you see for like the big murder trials. And we're actually having to take the oath, you know, and be cross-examined. It was a real huge experience. On day 2, so at the end of day 1, DEFRA legal team actually asked for the lads from the farm who worked for my dad. They called them to be witnesses the day after. So that was a mad panic because we had to get them train tickets. One of them didn't even own a suit. So my brother had to go off with him to the shops at night and get him a suit. He's never been out of his village, let alone out of Yorkshire. So that was all fun and games. So that was the first evening of the court case, was us scrambling around trying to get them train tickets and a suit. Anyway, they jumped on the train at 6 o'clock the next morning and came and met us in King's Cross, and they had to give evidence as well. So at the end of the 3 days, I actually thought, stupidly, the judge would go off and have a cup of tea, come back and tell us his decision. And he didn't. It took months, which was really surprising. I didn't expect it to be a big decision. But the reason that it did was because we would set a precedent for any protocol to be followed correctly. So it wouldn't matter what that protocol was for. If it hadn't been followed correctly, then whatever it was squashed or redone or whatever. And it even affected a tribe in South America, his decision. Now, I don't know whether it was a positive or a negative outcome for them. But you kind of think, again, you know, this is us from a little village in Yorkshire, just having this massive impact on a tribe somewhere in America that we haven't got a clue what's going on in their lives, but the judge's decision would affect that. So it was massive. And that 2 months felt like forever.
Sorry, Kate, how long was it from the test being positive to the courtroom? How much time? 18 months?
Yeah, it took about 18 months for us to get there. And like I say, you don't realise the length of time. It just, each day just rolled into another. You know, we were doing lots of research, lots of protocol reading. and just things like that, and as much as anything afterwards, I wanted to, I suppose, educate farmers, and that maybe sounds a bit patronising. I don't mean it to be, but we didn't realise that for a start, the skin test, the same person had to take the measurement on day 1 as day 3. We didn't realise that, and we were having 2 different people come in on the farm who were doing the measurements differently. Now, we actually did a little trial ourselves at home. I shaved a perfect square on one animal, and I brought a pair of calipers home from work. We squeezed the same amount of tissue, basically, and I did it, my dad did it, and my brother did it. And the difference in the measurement between me and my brother was 8 millimeters. So you might think, well, that's not very much. Mm-hmm. But for an animal to be positive when the farm was locked down, it was a 2 millimeter increase in thickness of skin. That was all. Mm. So if 2 millimeters, if it was over 2 millimeters, the animal actually had to go for slaughter. So between me and my brother, there was an 8 millimeter difference. So it did depend who squeezed those calipers as to how much measurement you got. So we didn't realize that, like I say, the same person has to take that measurement on day 1 as day 3. Needle changes. So at the time, their protocol was that the needles had to be changed every 20 animals. Now the needle was sterilized in between each animal because it goes back into like a little holster, which has got some sterilized solution in there. But the actual needle, to stop it becoming blunt and to have blunt needle trauma, the needle had to be changed every 20 times. That was on DEFRA's website. I don't know what that measurement is now, how often it has to be changed. You can't sort of find that information, or I can't find that information out anymore. The measurements are different depending on what area you're in. So a positive animal to in a standard test is 4 millimeters in our area, I believe now, whereas it was 5 when we did it. So the cow that had tested positive originally was over 5 millimeters. I believe that's down to 4 now. And what a severe interpretation is, I don't know. Ours was 2 mil. So it's quite important that the same person does that test on day 1 and day 3. And I would ask about needle changes, and I would make sure the needles are being sterilized in between, and that a new needle was put on the gun beforehand, and just things like that. It's things that we just took for granted that we never monitored. So when I say I wanted to educate farmers, that's what I meant. I just wanted to share our experience and things that we'd learned about the test, the do's and don'ts.
Did DEFRA accept the fact that they'd not followed the process when they collected the sample?
No. In court, the evidence that was given was that that there wasn't an issue, that Boxer hadn't played up, and no samples had been mixed.
So they lied?
I would say they did. The judge didn't. The judge said he preferred our version of events. And the piece of evidence really that showed that is, so each animal has a unique ear tag. So every animal, it's got its own passport and an ear tag number that relates to that passport. And so no animal has the same number. On the official DEFRA paperwork, when they came to do that blood test, you have the animal's ear tag number printed onto their sheets. So they come knowing every animal on your holding. And at the side of that, they peel the sticker off the blood sample, so the sample number, if you like, and they stick it at the side of the animal's ear tag number on the paperwork, so it correlates. So when the sample's sent off to the laboratory, they know that sample number 1 is that animal. So on the paperwork, moving down the list, we had Boxer's ear tag number and his sample number. But there was a gap of 3 numbers missing between him and the next animal, which showed that the vials that were used in order weren't used in order. So some vials had gone missing. Now, we spotted this on the paperwork a few weeks before court. and our barrister kept that one up his sleeve. And he did ask the technician on oath where those samples had gone. The response that was given was that they didn't know, and that they may have been in their pocket. So the judge decided, actually, all the other samples corresponded in order. There was no other ones went missing in their pocket. And so he, like I say, he gave the verdict that he preferred our version of events. So he didn't say that they were lying. He said he preferred our version.
Which is a tactful way of saying they were lying. No, I get what you're saying. I mean, it seems like it's your word against theirs in terms of nobody else could substantiate it one way or the other. But in all balance of probabilities, it's probably a case of, well, if those numbers didn't go in order, or there was, something that wasn't quite correct, it could prove your point that, they didn't follow the right process.
I think if we hadn't have found that information, it literally would have been our word against theirs. And although there was 5 of us present from our side of things when the testing happened, so 5 people gave evidence to say what had happened on our side of things, and only 2 on DEFRA's side, if you were, it does come down to who you believe. If there was no evidence, we didn't have CCTV cameras or anything around the farm at that point. We did after. The CCTV cameras all over now. But you didn't have things like that. So, the evidence literally was our word against theirs until that paperwork became available, and the samples were seen to be missing. After everybody had given their evidence, the judge then closed for the day and said he would make his decision in due course. And we were sort of left hanging, you're a bit deflated. You're kind of like, oh. So in true sort of our family fashion, we came out of the High Court, we went across the road and went to the pub and had a whiskey. Came home and just continued with our lives, really. I was sort of carried on back at work. Boxer stayed in isolation. And then one day we got a phone call from our solicitors, and they said that the decision had been made, the judge had given his ruling, and Boxer was allowed a retest. It was one of the best days of my life. I can't tell you how that felt. After all these years, the sort of feeling that it gives me to think about that phone call, it makes my eyes well up now. But what the judge said, he said he could have a retest, which was brilliant. But he said it was up to DEFRA how they wanted to carry that retest out. So it was up to them to decide what would satisfy them that he was either positive or negative. Which, on the one hand, the judge was amazing. On the other hand, I was kind of like, you kind of let us down a little bit there. You could have just said, one test, that'll do. Mm-hmm. So what Boxer had to do to be deemed as TB free, he had to pass 2 rounds of skin tests and 2 rounds of blood tests. So huge change in an animal being seen to be TB free from any area, because we have our TB test every 4 years. The animals are tested with the skin test, and that's it for 4 years. So it did feel a little bit unfair that we had to have 4 tests completed on Boxer before he was either, yes, he's got it, no, he hasn't. So the first morning they came out to do his test, he had to have the skin test and the blood test. Now, this is only how I felt, and my dad, my mum. But what they wanted to do was they wanted to do the skin test first. So if I just remind you, they wanted to measure his thickness of his neck, then inject a small amount of TB into his skin to
Why?
come back 3 days later and
Why do they?
test.
Why do they inject the TB into the skin?
So it's to see if the skin has a reaction to the TB.
Yeah.
I suppose it's a little bit like, we used to have the 6 needles. It's a similar sort of thing, I think. But yeah, so they inject a small amount of TB under the skin and then come back 3 days later to read that thickness of the skin. So they wanted to do that first, and then they wanted to take a sample from under his tail of the blood to send off directly to the laboratories for testing to see if they could find traces of TB in his system. Now, we felt this was the wrong way around. You don't inject something into an animal system to then take blood to try and find traces of that in its system. So as you can imagine, there was a little bit of a discussion at the farm, and we said, you're not doing it that way around, and they said, we are. There was a bit more of a discussion. And eventually they did it our way. So the blood sample was taken first, and then Boxer was injected in the skin with TB to have that skin sample measured a couple of days later. The results were packaged up, kept at body temperature, and rushed directly to the laboratories for testing. At that point, I just felt like I'd signed his death warrant. It was awful to watch that sample go because it was out of our control. And you just didn't know what the result was going to be. Throughout all of this, we didn't know whether he'd actually got TB or not. We just wanted the test to be done properly. So off the sample went. The following day, we got a phone call to say that the sample had clotted and they needed to come back and take another sample. As you can imagine, we weren't happy. His skin, the TB that had been injected into his skin, it can stay in their system for up to 30 days. So we refused to let them take another blood sample for 30 days. We were told it didn't matter, it wouldn't make a difference, but again, I couldn't understand how something potentially could be in his system and not show up on the blood test. So we stuck to our guns and we said, they weren't doing it for 30 days.
What was the relationship? Sorry, Kate. What was the relationship like between you and DEFRA at this point? So the inspectors that came to do the testing, was it quite standoffish, or was this person a bit more personable? Was he understanding of what was at stake?
Not as standoffish as the original chap that came in his white forensic suit, but I would say that there was a clash of priority. My priority was to protect Boxer, to have him tested properly, and to protect my mum and dad from anybody sort of bullying them, really, because that's what it felt like. It felt like you were being bullied. My background taught me to be able to speak to people who sort of was quite hierarchical in their mannerisms and not be intimidated by them. So I think I probably gave as good as I got, but we did it professionally, but neither of us were backing down. The daily phone calls about this test being redone, they did get there were raised voices, but no bad language, no slating each other. It was just almost a professional heated discussion. But there was no way I was letting them take his blood sample for 30 days. After 30 days, they came back and they redid his tests. So he did pass the first skin test. There wasn't even any inkling of a thickness in his skin. So that was brilliant. And then they came back and they redid both tests again after 30 days. So this time they did his blood test first and then his skin test, which there was no arguments, which on one hand you kind of go, that's brilliant. By this time we were quite untrusting, I suppose, about their aims of the test. And it's just how we were made to feel. We felt that it was in their interest that Boxster was positive, because although we didn't have social media like we have now, we were in all the national papers and in the news. So they didn't want to be seen to have a false reading. So it was in their interest that he failed, I suppose. So having the test done again, and the fact that they didn't argue in the way round that they were doing it, or, there was not even a discussion, made me really suspicious. I guess we didn't trust them. And so when the sample was packaged up, we insisted that we went with that sample to the laboratory door and watched it be handed over. Again, it's only how we felt, but I felt we were tried to be persuaded that we couldn't do that. Things like, there's not enough room in my car, I'm not coming back this way. So in the end, we just went in our own car and we followed the sample and we watched it being handed over at the laboratory door. We physically watched that sample get handed over. You knew you'd done everything that you could then to make sure that this was done properly, but the sample itself was out of our hands. It was down to the sort of credibility of the laboratory, I suppose. You were trusting the people in the labs to do the test properly. So Boxster passed his skin test again, which was brilliant. And we eventually got the phone call that his blood test he had passed as well. So he was seen as TB free, and he was allowed to be released back into the herd at my dad's. Never thought for a minute we would get to that point, but boy, were we relieved. To have it then, all the press turned up for his release from isolation. It was just surreal. It was one of them moments where you open your curtains and there's all these cars parked outside with people with big cameras, and you're like, again, it's just our little farm with our little bull, and the world wanted to know about it, which was brilliant. But then what they wanted me to do, because I'd been preaching for 18 months that he was such a gentle giant and, such a lovable boy, they said for me to walk into his isolation pen, pop a little halter on his head and lead him out and stand cheek to cheek for a photo. I thought by this point, he was 18 months older. So he was getting on for nearly 4-year-old. He should have been doing what bulls do. He should have certainly been with other animals. And I thought, he's going to have gone mad. He's not been touched, handled, and he's full of hormones. And they want me to go in and put this rope around his neck and lead him out and stand cheek to cheek for photos. He's going to kill me. I thought the headlines the following day was going to be like, woman saves bull, bull kills her, in front of press. So, but I thought, well, I've been telling everybody he's a gentle giant, so I'm going to have to do it. So I went in, popped his halter on, and he never put a foot wrong. He stood, he was a little bit wide-eyed, so he was a bit like, what on earth's going on? But I think because of the bond that we'd built up, he trusted me. And so he stood, they got the photo that they wanted, which is a lovely photo. To me, it says everything. And then my dad let the cows free out of the shed to walk across the yard to go into the field out to graze. And I literally slipped Boxster's halter off as the cows came to him. And he sort of walked forward into the middle of the herd, and he sort of like looked round and nuzzled a few. And then he looked at me as much to say, do you know that I'm here? And he like nuzzled a cow again. And then he looked back at me, and it was almost like this sort of light bulb moment that, oh my God, I don't care what she thinks, actually, I'm just going. And he started running, and he galloped around the field, and he bucked and he skipped. And it was just so wonderful to see. And he then spent the rest of that sort of summer doing what he should have been doing. I went up to see him every day, and the bond between us two just grew stronger. I love all my animals, but if I shouted him, he would leave a cow if it was, we call it in bulling, but if she was in season. So normally a bull, if a cow is in season, he will stand at the side of her and mate with her several times, but he doesn't leave her side. If I shouted Boxster and he was stood at the side of a cow because she was in season, he would leave that cow to come to me. And I don't know any other animal that would do that. He also shouted me as well. So he would do this really deep rumble as he came sort of running over. It was an amazing sort of bond that we were building. So I decided I wanted him with me. I packed my job in. I was fortunate enough that my husband was really supportive, helped me try and find a little small holding. And by him selling part of his company, we were able to buy the farm that we're at now. That wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for Boxster. It's a whole different story. But the lady who was selling didn't want to sell the place. When we looked round, she recognised me through Boxster's story. She'd followed the story. She came and met him. She allowed us to graze here for the whole summer. So we ended up becoming friends. And by the end of the summer, she wanted us to have the place as well. So she helped make it happen. So we moved here about just coming up to 10 years ago now. Brought Boxster with me. It was only when we actually loaded him into the trailer and brought him here that I realised actually he wasn't my bull. He was my mum and dad's. And I'd not even asked them if I could have him. I just kind of I suppose just took him. It was just a given that he was coming with me. So, so sorry, Mum. Maybe should have asked. But thanks for the gift. But yeah, so we spent a lot of years here. He was doing what he should have been doing. And when you have a bull and some cows, your herd increases. And so we had a really nice amount of animals around the farm, and he was the main man. But he did defy the odds again. He slipped his disc and paralysed himself. The vet said that he wouldn't be able to walk again. But we did get him back on his feet, and he went back to work and had a few more years of being a happy boy.
In terms of DEFRA and the lessons learned, have they changed their approach at all? Are they a bit more friendly in terms of how they approach things, or has anything changed since the incident?
Fortunately, we've never had an issue. So moving forward, TB test wise, we've always been TB free, which is brill. So personal experience, I can't really say. I do have people contact me now and again who are having issues. So again, it's their thoughts and feelings, and they always contact because something is happening TB wise to their animal. So emotions are high. But from what I'm hearing, I think most farmers don't feel like anything has changed in the way that we're supported when an issue arises or listened to. I think that hierarchical sort of attitude seems to remain, or that's how people feel, which is wrong. We should be working together. I have known a few issues that have been solved without going public. So has things changed? Hopefully, but maybe not enough. I honestly don't think it is going to change in the way and attitudes.
Do you think since 2010, there's more anxiety now when DEFRA come round to test for TB in that, as things changed? Have they become less trusting of that government agency, or is it still the same as it ever was?
I don't think maybe less trusting. I think the same opinion, which is sad that they're not really there to help, which it should be. That's how we should feel. We should feel great. We've got this problem. The right people are here now to guide us through it. And from the farmers that I've spoke to that have had issues, that isn't what they felt. They felt exactly like us on that very first day, when the men in white suits turned up, So I can only talk from their experience. They've not really, they haven't rung me up and said, "Oh, this is great." We've had such great help from them. But like I say, personally, we've not had any issues. So,
do you think DEFRA were hoping that you would not fight the case?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I think it was probably, it's not something that happens very often. I think people may question or challenge them, but to risk your whole farm, which is exactly what we did, £120,000. My mum and dad they're not big farmers. They're not Jeremy Clarkson, money-wise. They risked everything that they had. But I don't know is the honest answer. I think, I don't think they thought we would challenge them to the point we did. I felt that they felt if they sort of was bully boy tactics enough, that we would back down. That's how I felt.
If you were to change the process to reform the way DEFRA tests for TB, what would you like to see change?
If we have to test, I would like to see a test that is more accurate, definitely. Those calipers, you can squeeze it as hard or as tight, or as little as you want. Obviously, if a huge lump appears that's visible, then it's visible. But the thickness of that skin, 2 millimeters, it's just ridiculous. And like I say, it's over 100-year-old. I'm no scientist, I'm no tech guru, but there's got to be something better. There's got to be a different way if we need to test it all. And other animals, we should be looking at them all, but we don't. So I think maybe cattle are targeted a little bit too much, or it's too easy to target them. I don't really know. After like I say, before our case, it was something that I would never even paid any attention to, really. It was just one of those things that we did every 4 years. After our case, I did start getting involved in a few sort of development groups and things. But to be fair, the stress and the pressure of what we'd been through made every single one of us in the family ill in some shape or form. And you get to a point where you can't take on anything else. So for your own health, you kind of drop things and leave it. So research-wise, I have not done any more research into TB. What's right, what's wrong, I can only give you my opinion. And my opinion is that the test is just so archaic. We should be doing something else different. There's thousands of animals slaughtered each year. And for us, we were a pedigree breeding herd, which means that it's lines of generations of breeding, of genetics that you don't get back. And in terms of money, you get paid out the meat value of that animal. Well, you lose those breeding lines. Everything that my dad had worked hard for, the special cow that I told you about, she ended up going during the post when we were locked down, because we had to be tested every 30 days. The tests were carried out again on all the animals. And this is when I found out that the same person should be doing the measurements pre and post injection. So during that period, we were losing animals, and DEFRA were reporting that we were basically riddled with TB. None of those animals showed to have lesions at post-mortem. And when I found out that the same person should do the measurement, I started paying our vets to come at the same time and carry the same test out. So their result basically didn't matter. the government the DEFRA was never going to take their measurement into consideration. But what I felt was the measurement, the increase in thickness of skin should be the same. So if an animal is positive, the DEFRA official would work out that that animal was positive, and so would our vet. And from that moment on, when our vets started coming on farm, we never lost another animal. Again, it's only how we felt, but we felt that we didn't trust the process before that to be true. You know, it was in our interest to be TB negative with every animal, and it was in their interest for us to be TB positive. So, but that old cow that I talked about, my dad was devastated, and my mum absolutely adored her. You know, she was one of their first cows. That line, that genetic line, then sort of stopped. You know, and it's sad, and that's what farmers are facing. It's not just the money; it's your hard work year after year after year that you're losing because we have this really naff testing system.
I don't know if you can answer this question. In other around the world, do they screen for TB in the same way, or do they have more sophisticated ways of screening for TB?
No, to be honest, I can't answer it and answer it with confidence. But I do know that in certain places they don't test for TB. And they say they don't have TB. So if you don't test for it, you don't have it. I don't know. So I don't know the answer to that, to be honest.
And when there is a positive test result at a farm, is there a stigma that goes with that? Do you, as a farm, feel like there's a stigma that one of my herd have tested positive, or is it something you just move on?
I think it throws you into a panic. And then there's a radius area where all farmers in that area are then, their animals have to be tested. So you feel a sense of guilt that your neighbouring farmers have to then have all their animals tested, and potentially may get a positive, whether it be a true positive or a negative positive. You're impacting your local farming community in some shape or form. So yeah, there's lots of mixed feelings with that.
What are you doing now, Kate? So you've got this farm that you've set up. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do now, what the business is?
So all my animals are pretty much as soft as Boxy was. So I wanted to share that with people because I do think that animals can bring some sense of calm, stress relief. They're just good to be around. Animals know when we need a bit of TLC. They also tell you when they're not happy as well. So they don't cover anything up. They'll just walk away from you when they've had enough of you. So I wanted to share that with people, and we started doing farm experiences. So people could come, and you're going to laugh at this, but you can cuddle a cow. When I say cuddle a cow, we spend time stroking the cows. They learn about the cows, but they're up close and personal. So you don't literally just walk in, put your arms around it, give it a cuddle and walk out. There is a lot more to it. But yeah, we do a cuddle a cow experience. We do goat walking. But actually that has led me on to opening a new sort of company. I've joined forces with two wonderful women who, one is a sort of life stress management coach. The other does breathwork training and sort of trauma management. They're both qualified. I don't offer my animals as a therapy, but now I can because I have these two experts who guide people through the workshop. So we offer two sort of different types of workshops. One is called Pause at the Farm. You literally come for half a day, and we'd teach stress management techniques, how to recognize stress before it really affects you, tools that you can take away to help you to relieve stress, and we incorporate the nature and the animals in that training. So it's quite exciting. It's new. We are hoping to get funding for that to be able to offer it to people who really need it. We've done a couple of trials, one with the NHS, which had different groups of people coming together. That worked really well. And then we've had a corporate group of people who knew each other, worked together day in, day out. And the responses from them were amazing as well. They found a lot out about each other that they actually didn't know. So both those trials worked really well. So excited to see what the future brings with that. Like I say, it's the start of a journey, but we've called ourselves Root and Rise Together. And we're hoping that, come next summer, we're going to be able to help a lot of people manage their stress levels and stop themselves getting ill, because that's what happened to me. All three of us that are running this company have got experience with poor health through to some kind of trauma in our lives. So we've been there, and now we're offering the tools as well to be able to sort of stop other people happening to them. And as if I aren't busy enough, we also run an embroidery business here with my husband. So we have a 6-head embroidery machine and churn out loads of different badges for people. So it keeps me out of mischief. And the animals certainly keep me busy. It's hard to just go out and feed them because they all want your attention and they want stroking and cuddling. And so, yeah, going out and seeing to the animals takes quite a long time, because I have to play on the trampoline with the goats, and I have to cuddle the sheep and stroke the cows and kiss the calves. And so, yeah, it's a nice life. It's a life I didn't think I'd have. Never thought I would leave my previous job. I worked in the NHS, loved it. But actually, Boxy changed my life. But it changed my life for the better. I wouldn't be where I am now if we hadn't have gone through everything that we went through. He really did sort of channel out where I am now. And just a picture as well, I did write my book to tell the whole story, because a lot of people did follow us in the press. But like I say, we didn't have social media like we have now. We certainly didn't have people wanting to chat to us on YouTube. But so I did write the book to tell the whole story, because as much as the press followed our story, we couldn't tell everything. So I wrote the book that is available from me, and just to get the word out there a little bit more, some would say to wind people up a little bit, I do guest speaker events all over Yorkshire as well. So if any of your listeners want me to come and talk their ear off, I can talk for hours.
Kate, thanks for being on the podcast. You've been a wonderful guest. It's an amazing story.
Thank you, Tony.
No problem.
Come for a cow cuddle.
Take care, Kate.
All right, Tony. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.